Skeptic Zone, a miracle of technology. A universe of reason, the Skeptic Zone.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone, episode number 36 for the 26th of June 2009. Richard Saunders here with you. In today's episode, we have an interview with Theo Clark. Now, Theo Clark and his dad, Jeff Clark, produce a podcast called Hunting Humbug 101, all about logical fallacies, and we'll get to that interview soon. And after that, we have a talk by Kylie Sturgess, a talk she gave last year, Belief in Weird Things, Recent Developments and Educational Directions. So sit back, have a glass of nice cold root beer, and enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Theo Clark is a former teacher who now writes science curriculum in the state of Queensland, Australia. He is co-author of Humbug, a skeptic's guide to spotting fallacies in thinking, and produces a podcast, Hunting Humbug 101. He still tells people he's a teacher rather than a bureaucrat. You can check him out at www.skepticsfieldguide.net. And joining me now from sunny Brisbane in Queensland, Australia, is Theo Clark. Hello, Theo.
G'day, Richard. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, about time too. I've been listening to your podcast for quite a long time now, the Hunting Humbug 101. Couple of questions. Now, this is based on the book, The Skeptic's Guide to Spotting Fallacies in Thinking. What made you and your dad, Jeff, decide to create such a book?
Yeah, well, it's kind of an ongoing project, I guess. And my father Jeff was probably the one who instigated it in some of the courses he was teaching at a particular university up here in Brisbane. Woolloomooloo, let's call it that for now. Basically, you know, marking students' essays and so on, he'd explain to them in detail why they were making mistakes in reasoning, and instead of just being able to use a single term, he'd have to, you know, outline it and repeat it, and he just got sick of it happening. So he initially made a small kind of, worksheet on fallacies, and then from just our conversations we had when I came back from teaching overseas in the UK in 2004, it just started building up, and we said, why don't we write a book? Because all the other logic books you see are very dry and technical, and there's very good books out there, but a lot of them are quite expensive too. So we thought, let's just make an inexpensive guidebook, and we framed it around the idea of just, you know, you're hunting for fallacies, you're looking for fallacies, and it's more of a sport, I suppose, than necessarily the whole philosophical background from fallacies. Yeah. Right.
And it's interesting, I have a very early copy of your book here in front of me. Now, there are many logical fallacies that are described in the book and your podcast, which we'll get to in a moment. Did you and your dad come up with the terms for these fallacies, or were they known already?
No,
for example, obviously we've got the false compromise, the burden of proof, gibberish, moving the goalpost, special pleading, cultural origins, false analogy, and so on. It goes. So these were sort of known examples?
Yeah, I mean, they're out there, and there's many different ways of classifying them. We just went for alphabetical order, and then just some of the terms we just thought, well, let's just... we used either common ones, or we went for just versions of them that we found appealing or more memorable. But yeah, certainly like all those ones you listed, yeah, they're well-known terms. Some of the other ones we went for, such as false positioning, that's more commonly known as straw man. So in the ebook edition of the book, which is on the web, we went for straw man because we thought, well, actually, it's a better description anyway. It's more memorable. So yeah, I mean, we haven't in the book we haven't really come up with too many new ones, but probably I think the internet has spawned. People have come up with new ways of speaking rubbish, And so the internet has spawned some new ones. So we've coined some more satirical ones too, like the WTF fallacy, which is, technically not a fallacy.
Yes,
It's just
yes.
when people are speaking absolute rubbish, there's a certain point where you've got to withdraw, otherwise you don't go to sleep. So
Yes.
you can claim WTF on them, but that's a bit more satirical, a bit tongue in cheek. But
Yeah.
I think, these are well known out there, and there's probably many different ways of classifying, many different terms. And one of the things we talk to students about too is don't get hung up on the name, get hung up on explaining why their reasoning is poor. The name is how do you remember it and how you classify, but really the important thing is to actually think about where the error in reasoning is. So that's probably the focus, I suppose, in our podcast too, is to, these things aren't black and white in which particular fallacy someone is, because people mix them up. So just try and reflect on the reasoning or lack of in someone's argument, and I hope that's what comes through. Certainly in the podcast and probably on our website, and the book's, just meant to be a fun way to introduce people to it, I suppose.
So, yes, the podcast is fascinating because really every episode looks at a different fallacy in thinking or logical fallacy. So you read a little bit from the book, you and your dad, Jeff,
Yep.
and then you go on with a more in-depth explanation as to why this is a fallacy in thinking.
Yeah, well, I think the internet, first of all, when it started, really taking off with Web 2.0, with blogs and so on, was a really good way to start off explaining fallacies in more detail and using real examples, because that's one thing we try and do is use real examples, whereas, again, a lot of textbooks and that, they're made up, contrived examples, so they're not really that useful for the real world because the real world is more complicated. So that's where it started. And then essentially the podcast was, we have these conversations. I'm sure you're the same. You do your think tank in the pub, and you have these conversations with people, and you think, this is a great conversation if only more people could hear it. Very egotistical, of course, but that's probably where it came from. And in terms of elucidating or explaining something, when you're right, it takes a long time. But when you speak, it's very short. Now, in hindsight, editing a podcast, I know I don't need to tell you, it does actually take some time. But I think it's more engaging and more interesting. So even just the amount of feedback we've gotten from people just from doing a podcast, it's I haven't done a proper scientific study and I've got my own personal biases, but certainly I've gotten a lot more feedback in the short time I've been doing a podcast than just from the website, which we've had up for about 3 or 4 years. So I think that medium just allows you to really get into the nuts and bolts of it quicker and with more detail, if not as necessarily well thought out, because I'm sure you agree. Sometimes when you listen back to some of the things you say, you think, why did I say that? Too late. Although I at least get to edit out my bits because I do all the editing, and Dad obviously in there. I stack the deck nicely.
I see. See,
I shouldn't have said that.
You shouldn't have said that. You're using some of your own. I mean, it's very important, I think, for people interested in skepticism to listen to your podcast and have access to your book. Now, your book's available online as an e-book, isn't it?
Yeah, as an e-book, yeah. That was, again, we thought, the internet has really changed the dynamic of how you get information out there. And, the old models of trying to make money off stuff don't really work the way they used to use. People want information for free. And we didn't write the book, to get minted from it. A book on fallacies is not really probably going to make you much money. Once we thought we'll put up the ebook version so people can get to the fallacies and so on. It is a little bit that, like, the introduction's gone. The introduction in the paperbacks are more detailed and so on. But let's get it out there. If people want to use it in lectures or at schools and things like that, they can print off a particular fallacy and look at it. Because at the end of the day, as you said, it's so important that we have people starting to think critically about things and being a bit skeptical.
I think so. I think it's very good to know, and I'm trying to remember if you made this point in your podcast. You probably have.
I'll take credit for it.
Oh, yeah, okay. that we as skeptics and critical thinkers should be familiar with these logical fallacies, in order, if nothing else, in order that we don't commit them ourselves. Absolutely,
yeah, and that's certainly one major thing, and that's what we said in the introduction to the book, is that one of the things about constructing an argument. Now, there's books on how to construct an argument. We went the other way. We thought, well, if you learn how to get rid of the bad points in an argument, kind of by default, you're only left with the good ones. So that's a bit of a shortcut to making sure an argument that you're constructing is a valid one. Of course, you can use it for the devious ends too, and deliberately employ them for your own benefit. But, you know, at the end of the day, even if you're just aware of there are these things called fallacies out there, because a lot of people, you talk to them, they don't even realise there's things you can make a bad argument. They just they have a gut feeling that someone's telling them rubbish, but they don't really understand that you can construct an argument based on premises and have a conclusion and things like that. So it's I suppose it's just like a language, another language to speak, and it adds another tool to your intellectual toolkit, I guess, if you're aware of these fallacies, and just the general idea of trying to put links together to make an argument make sense.
And since listening to your podcast and reading your book, it is difficult. I will have to admit, it is difficult to keep all these in mind when you're talking to somebody. And quite often someone will make a logical fallacy, or they'll employ something like the browbeating, which you explain in your book, or whatever the case may be. And quite often it's very hard to catch it as it happens, because you're concentrating on the conversation or the argument, and you're trying to think up your point of view, and suddenly they'll sneak in, even without knowing it, some outrageous logical fallacy, and yes, that can go right over your head sometimes. Yeah,
and that's the thing, is to not get hung up on it in the actual point in time, and also to be happy to say to someone, look, I've taken on what you're saying, but I really can't respond to it at this point. I need a bit of time to think about what you're saying, because in the heat of an argument, you know, people don't often think to do that. But also, yeah, I mean, really don't get hung up on the terms so much. Just try and think about what did they say that didn't make much sense. Can I dissect it? Probably the main thing when you're actually discussing something with someone in real time, the number one thing I've noticed, especially when I listen to, debates between prominent thinkers like, Richard Dawkins and somebody or whatnot, they really let them go off topic straight away. And so that's moving the goalposts. And that's probably the main tactic people use. So that's really important one. It's just to say, no, this was a point we were addressing. You haven't answered it yet. Stay on it. So, good journalists will do that with politicians.
No, they try to do it.
Yeah, they try to do it with politicians. They'll admit defeat. They'll go, okay, you're not going to answer that. But at least they've said you haven't answered that. Whereas the slippery people are the ones who just shift the conversation slowly, and you don't realise that you've actually moved off topic. So there's some little tactics, but again, when I wrote the book, for example, I wasn't as good at it as I am now, and that's just because by doing the website and practicing it and looking at it and doing it over time, you just get better. Well, you hope you get better anyway. People don't stress over it. Just think it's an ongoing thing. Lifelong learning, all that kind of stuff.
You're the sort of person I wish I had by my side when I was filming the television show The One last year, because I was hearing an awful lot of interesting arguments, so to speak, and I know there was logical fallacies being thrown left, right, and centre, but it is very difficult to keep up. Yeah. Now, actually, because I watched The One, and I thought, you're in a rock and a hard place, because but you did the exact right thing, which is, again, if you read any research on debates, the points people make are irrelevant. It's how likable you are. So, on that sense, you did very well, because people don't care. They just like the look of you and what you sound like. It's sad, but it's not sad. That's just how humans are. And use it to your advantage. Yeah. With me, it's very sad. Look, while I've got you there, there's one that I find comes up quite a lot, and simply. What I mean is, especially recently, we've been arguing a lot with people who believe that you shouldn't vaccinate babies, for example.
Yep.
This is a big issue at the moment. And quite often, they will throw up, which is listed in your book here, the earlier version I have is flaw number 8, the false dichotomy. Could you spend a moment explaining that one? Because I think that's a very important issue.
Yeah, I mean, the false dichotomy or false dilemma is one people use all the time. And basically it's black or white reasoning. So either you do this one thing or you don't do this other thing. And so they split things up where, well, why can't we go in the middle? Why isn't there necessarily a middle decision to make? Or is there a third option? And it's very often it's just deliberately done as a tactic, unconsciously often. But a good example I can think of, because we did a podcast on this one, so these are the examples I got off the top of my head. But, the Large Hadron Collider, there are all these people that came out, they're spending $20 billion on this thing. It's $20 billion over 10 years. Why aren't they spending it on X, Y, and Z? Well, it's like, why can't they spend on this and on X, Y, and Z?
Right.
So unless you tell me why we can't do one or the other, why we can't do them both, then you're creating a false dichotomy. The anti-vaxxers, their classic one they kind of do is something like it's a choice between either immunising your child, which will then give them autism, which is rubbish,
Yeah.
or doing it some alternative way, like exposing your children to measles when there's a measles outbreak around. And it's like, well, first of all, you're creating this false dilemma where you're actually basing it on a factoid that's incorrect. You're basing it on something that's been demonstrated in the literature over time to be incorrect. The other one they're really good at doing, and this is one, we've already done the podcast on this one, but if I were doing it again, I'd talk about this one, which is they stack the deck. So by stacking the deck is put the cards in an order that means that their argument looks strong. And by what they actually do is all they ever talk about with autism is the supposed link with vaccines. And they never mention any of the actual research that's being done on autism. And, when this started happening, I thought, I'll go and have a look at some of the actual things about autism, what's going on. And there's so much evidence out there about the actual cause, about the genetic causes of it, things like that, about some studies that are now done where they can even identify with about 80% accuracy of children's behaviour at the age of 6 months by their lack of eye contact and whether they've got autism or not. Now, they're not getting the MMR vaccine until, 2 years old. So, there's so much evidence, but they never talk about that. So if you go to some of the big autism vaccine blogs and you search for those things, they're never there. So that's a classic one. Just ignore any counter evidence and just focus on your particular, thing you're into. So in this case, hating science, as the case may be.
It's interesting too. Another thing that comes up, and I wonder if this is sort of associated with it, and again, it's showing my ignorance here, trying to keep all these fallacies in mind, is where they'll bring up the concept of balance. Yeah. Let's take the anti-vaxxers again. So there's the line that we should vaccinate our kids to prevent these diseases, etc. And they'll say, oh yes, but we want balance. We want the other side of the story shown. Now, as you and I both know, there is no other side. Yeah. Well, it's insane.
We haven't done the podcast on that one, but I'll probably use that. It'll be false compromise. So false compromise is where you're making this compromise between... So a journalist might make a false compromise and say, well, let's do both sides and treat them equally. Now, balance means about you are fair in your investigation of what's going on and you're balanced in your investigation. That doesn't mean you present two unequal sides. That'll be... if you're having a debate about whether the Earth is, how old the Earth is, you're not going to bother inviting a young Earth creationist there because we know the evidence says they're completely and utterly wrong. So why would you do the same with the anti-vaxxers? The only reason is because it's interesting controversy. That's the only reason journalists do it. But there's no... and the other one they do, of course, is bad faith and being completely disingenuous. So on that Channel 7 thing that we had recently that you guys went to, the doctor that got up there and she said, I'm not anti-vaccines, but I'm pro-choice. But it's like, hang on, have you ever given a vaccine? So if someone came into your practice and said, I want a vaccination, would she do it? No. So completely disingenuous in the way she acts as well. So if you're pro-choice, you would give someone a vaccine if they wanted it. They're very disingenuous in the way they argue as well. So.
Well, it's good. It's good to know, and it's again for any skeptic out there who's especially getting into this field, or the seasoned skeptic. I can sincerely recommend you avail yourself of this great information. Now, the podcast. How can people hear your podcast?
Well, the best way to see all the stuff is just to go to if you Google my name, Theo Clark, I'm actually the number one Theo Clark on Google. But possibly because of my first name gives me an unfair advantage. But yeah, the www.skepticsfieldguide, all one word, .net, and that's skeptics with a capital K because I like the look of it better too. Yeah. Even though in Australia, technically we're meant to spell it with a C.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's where you can go to have a look, and then it's pretty obvious from there. There's links everywhere. the ebooks down the bottom of the page is a PDF. It's on scribed.com, so you can get it from there as well and download it and print it off and bind it or whatever you want to do. We're also selling the actual paperback for $20 Australian, and there's a link there on the website for that as well. Even posted overseas. That'll cost you a little bit more for the postage, but Australian dollar's so weak anyway for any American listeners out there. No problems for you guys to buy it. So that's the other option too as well. And it's all there on the website. And now before I go, Richard, and before we end this, I have a little plug I want to do to all Australians out there. In my job, which is as a science curriculum writer in Queensland, I get to enjoy looking at the science curriculum and so on, which is obviously as skeptics we're pretty concerned about. And at the moment, Australia is writing a national curriculum, and at the moment they're writing it, and the draft versions of the curriculum will be out at the beginning of 2010. So I encourage all Australian skeptics, to get on the website for the Australian Curriculum and Reporting Authority. And when those drafts come out, make sure you read them and give them some feedback, some positive feedback about the good things they're doing, and question some of the dodgy things, because they specifically say in the aims of the Australian science curriculum, the word skepticism is there. And then they actually say students should be able to engage in communication of and about science, value evidence and skepticism, and question scientific claims made by others. So I think there's an opportunity there for skeptics to really try and push that word to be in the curriculum, and to really say it's a good positive word out there, because, again, as we know, that word is often confused with cynicism. And if we can actually get that language into our science curriculum and have that being a term that's used and talked about in science classrooms, because unsurprisingly, I suppose, a lot of science teachers aren't particularly skeptical, it'd be fantastic if we could get that in our Australian curriculum. So I really encourage everyone to go to the Australian Curriculum website. That's www.acara.edu.au. So it's ACARA. And when their drafts come out, get on there, have a look at them, and give them some positive feedback about that word skepticism.
Great idea. Absolutely. I encourage everybody to do that. And I also encourage everybody to grab a copy of Humbug, The Skeptic's Guide to Spotting Fallacies in Thinking. Listen to the podcast, because each podcast breaks down a different fallacy. And how many have you got up there by now? It must be a big number by now.
Well, I saw that you were working on The Zone, and I've been working on my podcast, and be number 29 going up. We're getting a bit slack at the moment, trying to get them up, but we're doing about once every fortnight. And I'm trying to hopefully get them all done before the end of August, because that's when I'm expecting another child. And so I'm a bit worried about my output after that point. But yeah, so we're doing about once every fortnight at the moment, and we're up to 29. So I imagine we'll get up in the high 30s at least before we run out of fallacies to talk about. And then we might just pick out some random ones here and there to look at.
That's excellent. And of course, it's not only a discussion about the fallacies. You do other things in your podcast too. I remember there was a memorable time where you were talking to a psychic, or you went to see a psychic.
Yeah. And we've got another one up in a similar vein. It's not specifically about a fallacy. We're going to sit down with a couple of skeptical people I know, and we're going to come up with lists of all the things we've changed our mind about, because one of the things you get as a skeptic, of course, is, oh, you're closed-minded, you wouldn't change your mind about anything. And it's really annoying, because it's one of those ones where when I walk away, as you're saying before, you haven't thought about these things and you don't have an answer on the spot. And I walk away and go, yes, I have. I've changed my mind about this, this and that. But it's too late. So I thought, if I come up with a list, then I'm good to go. So I'm going to do one. We're going to sit down and work out some things I changed my mind. I was wrong once. I remember it happened back in 1987.
Yes.
So that's a plan. I encourage all skeptics to come up with that list, so you're good to go when someone accuses you of being closed-minded.
An excellent idea. Now, I hope I will see you in Brisbane in November for the Australian Skeptics Convention.
Yep, absolutely. I'm looking forward to that.
Excellent. Well, look, thanks, Theo. Keep up your excellent podcast. I do enjoy listening to it. I try to remember as much as possible. And my regards to your dad, Jeff, who helps you out on the podcast, of course.
And can I just reaffirm everything you said about me right back at you, Richard? Fantastic work.
Thank you. And thank you for being our guest today on the Skeptic Zone.
Thank you.
Help re-establish the herd immunity of Nevada. TAM 7 is fast approaching, and those of you who have already signed up may have noticed something a bit different about the bottom of the registration page. This year, the James Randi Educational Foundation is working with the Southern Nevada Health District, SNHD, to provide vaccinations for children in Nevada. To help support this worthy cause, please visit www.randi.org for more information.
So that's why you can't eat it. I was just talking to the students here. Now look, I'm supposed to tell you about something. The Cosmic Tea Party, a new science podcast. Podcast? The hell is that? At any rate, it's about science and mathematics. Sounds rather dull. Oh, hang on. It says here, not dull. So there you have it, the Cosmic Tea Party podcast. www.cosmicteaparty.org, or search for them on iTunes.
All right, now this next segment is presented by our reporter Kylie Sturgess when she spoke last year at the Perth Atheists. Perth Atheists. Try saying that 3 times quickly. Perth is very much on our mind at the moment because the University of Western Australia is hosting a secular week in August, and Dr. Rachel Dunlop and myself are planning on doing a talk at UWA Atheists and Agnostics Society. We are looking for help to get over to Perth, and thanks to UWA Atheists and Agnostics Society, Perth Atheists and WA Humanist Society, we're brainstorming ideas. If you'd like to help donate for flights to Perth or support the Skeptic Zone, the PayPal button is on our site at www.skepticzone.tv. In the meantime, thanks very much to the Perth Atheists for allowing us to use the audio from Kylie's talk last year. All about belief in weird things, recent developments, and educational directions.
My name is Kylie Sturgess, but most of the time I'm known as Sturjo. Hey Sturjo, what are you doing over there? Sturjo! Haven't handed in my homework. Sturjo! If the students are being particularly annoying, they call me Sturge, which in my mind sort of comes across as sort of a disease a cow would get. Like it died of brucellosis and Sturge, sort of rotting away there. So Sturjo's fine. I've responded to that for about the last 10 years as a teacher. The presentation I have is primarily about definitions for the first part, and I've got a bit of reading to do, but it does hold some ideas about possible strategies for atheists within their community. Although being sceptical is not something I think is necessary for an atheist to be, I do think that there is some common ground regarding what I have personally experienced in education that perhaps atheists can voice their opinions upon. Finally, I would like to encourage those who are teachers. Are there any teachers here? No? Cool. Even interested in education in one way or another about the future of the young in our community. If you know teachers, have a stakeholder in a school, like you might live near a school, have the opportunity to view a school. It's useful to have an interest in education today, maybe have a say in what's going to happen next generation. One of the first things that I usually do is say, what is scepticism? And scepticism is, of course, mean-spirited naysayers, debunkers, people who usually stay most of the time in the kitchen at parties, or worse, they're behind the bar because they're the only sober ones, and they make sure that the police come and get you when things get too rowdy.
I stay in the kitchen at parties.
There you go, you're a sceptical person. Now, this obviously isn't true, but it is generally the sort of reputation that people who are sceptically minded get. I would point out that I don't normally go around calling myself a sceptic. Dr. Michael Shermer, who's going to be touring here soon, who has a magazine called Skeptic, he doesn't often call himself a sceptic either, because scepticism is about a process. It's a label which often has negative connotations, as I demonstrated, and most of the time I just call myself an educator. I'm female, I'm a research assistant, I'm a student of anomalistic psychology, of which I'll go into in a bit more detail later. I also study educational measurement of paranormal beliefs. My experience and background, 10 years as a teacher. I have a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature and Philosophy. I have a Diploma of Education. My first MEd was in Special Learning Needs Education because of gifted and talented kids. And my second MEd is probably more tending towards educational psych. Since scepticism is something that's done, it always seems a little bit weird to call myself a skeptic. In one radio interview, for example, the radio interviewer just off the top of his head said, "So what are you, a critical thinker or a skeptic?" And I said, "Critical thinker." If he gave me more options, I probably would have chosen more options, but skeptic just didn't seem to come to mind, which is rather odd. Skepticism derives from the Greek. Its original meaning was inquiry and doubt, which is a pretty good approximation of a definition. It means engendering inquiry and doubt. Later philosophers used the word to mean philosophical doubt. The notion of all pretense to knowledge is mere hubris. Attempting to ascertain that there is true reality in the world is incredibly arrogant, and you can never know the reality of anything. In other words, we know nothing and can know nothing. Apparently, Pyrrho, one of the great fathers of scepticism, was very fond of walking off cliffs because he just denied that it was there, and all his followers were trying to grab him and make sure he didn't do it all a lot. In contemporary vernacular, someone who is sceptical generally means someone who questions conventional wisdom, someone who habitually or excessively doubts. It's often used as a pejorative, means closed-minded, and it's the baggage that we just have to deal with, essentially. Some more modern sceptical-minded people like Richard Wiseman they're trying to reinvent the word. They come up with books like Quirkology, which look at a wide variety of quirky things in psychology and try to step away from the notion of skeptic altogether. So what does scepticism involve? Scepticism involves favouring conclusions that are valid and consistent and reliable rather than convenience sake. You can probably all read it there. That definition comes from Dr. Steve Novella, who has a podcast, and he also contributes quite regularly to a variety of magazines. He contributes to his own blog called Neurologica and is a member of Quackwatch. He's primarily interested in investigating medical claims due to his background at Yale University. Scientific scepticism is an approach to knowledge, and it's tied strongly to scientific knowledge. It involves following a methodology based on scientific inquiry. It's not a set of conclusions or there is an ultimate truth. Scepticism is about what do we know now, and there's always the potential that things could change in the future. And that's an important distinction to be made. One of the most detailed lectures that I've attended online upon this subject was, in fact, by Dr. Stephen Novella. To paraphrase him, you don't assume that there is or isn't an existence of the supernatural, but what can be observed so far is what you go by. So basically, being sceptical means you investigate nature as if it's naturalistic or materialistic, and you follow a methodology within that paradigm. In this way, we can see how scepticism contributes to understanding a process behind what do we know about what we know. In psychology, there's a variety of contributions from anomalistic psychology and even parapsychology. You can look at cognitive biases, for example. There's dozens of these. The von Rostoff effect, for example, things that stick out like a sore thumb. You're more likely to notice them. We started talking about one earlier as well, about how you can have visual illusions, but you can also have oral illusions, illusions of the ear, where you start thinking that what is being said in garbled tones is something really being said in English, or a variety of other languages, depending where you're from. There's the gambler's fallacy. You flipped a coin, you've got 5 heads, the next one's bound to be a tail. And this is what keeps people making a lot of money in casinos, the hope that the next one will be the winner. There's personality factors involved in whether or not people believe in weird things. There's developmental issues, magical thinking. How many of you used to believe that Teddy had feelings? Or better yet, that kicking the door frame when it got in your way would punish the door? That's a good example of what Piaget would call magical thinking, believing that things had feelings. And it even extends into modern day times. There is a variation on it which was studied by a group of Helsinki psychologists where they offered people a jumper. Here, would you wear this? Oh, yeah, sure, I'd wear that. It used to be owned by a mass murderer. Would you wear it? No way. Still a jumper. I'm not touching that. It was owned by a mass murderer. No. Hitler's moustache brush was another one which came up. Would you touch Hitler's moustache? No, I never would. The nature of memory is another one that comes up again and again, and we may have heard several times about how people's memory have been distorted through court cases. Yes, I believe that was the masked man there. And yet we are notoriously unreliable. One of my favourite papers came up by Principi and Smith this year. It's called The Tooth, the Whole Tooth and Nothing But the Tooth, How Belief in the Tooth Fairy Can Engender False Memories. to examine how children's fantasy beliefs can affect your memory for your experiences. 5 and 6-year-olds with differing levels of belief in the tooth fairy were asked to recall what they knew about the tooth fairy. Those who believed in it suddenly came up with amazing supernatural stories of what happened when their tooth got taken away. Those who knew that the tooth fairy was just a myth just gave straightforward factual explanations. Oh, look there, it wasn't gone there. I got money, brought candy, lost more teeth. It was great. The psychology of deception and self-deception, magic tricks, and this is probably one of the most popular things that you can get on stage whenever you go to a conference about anomalistic psychology, parapsychology, anything to do with skeptics. You're going to get magicians up on the stage. Penn and Teller is a popular one. They have a show. Many people see it. Many people record it. Many people are quite shocked by the language in it. There's only one episode of the show that I can use, and that is the one on the Ouija boards, because they only swear twice. I always talk to the students ahead of time, so they're going to say 2 bad words, I'm really sorry. And then they say, we know more words than that. Yeah, thanks kids, yeah, great. But self-deception and self-delusion, it's a big one. There are a range of other psychological variables that are studied in regards to this, in how claims are approached. And of course, you get overlaps all the time within normal psychology. So there's 2 proper areas for skeptics is one thing that has been argued by a popular skeptic, the man who writes Junior Skeptic, Daniel Loxton. On the podcast Skepticality, he says that one is the promotion of science literacy and critical thinking, and the other is consumer protection in fringe science areas in regards to paranormal claims. Now, I must admit that there was the consumer protection idea that first drew me into looking at sceptical ideas, possibly due to an interest in documentaries. There was a TV show back in the 80s called The Investigators, involving people who were being ripped off by frauds and scams, and the idea that people could watch out for this, that the con man could be taken apart and shown to have several techniques that it was using, that you could protect yourself. So why is scepticism not atheism?
Apparently they've taken gullible out of the dictionary.
Yes. I believe they've taken gullible out of the dictionary and they've said, God, you're an idiot. And you turn to idiot and it says, oh, not you again. Oh, there we are. Studies of beliefs on weird things. That's not a limited list, by the way. This is probably a most popular list of things that you'll get for weird things. ESP, PK, psychic readings, psychic healing, alternative and complementary medicine, out-of-body and near-death experiences, astrology and other divinatory techniques, reincarnation, UFOs and aliens, ghosts, poltergeists, crystal power, dowsing. 2 of my favourite ones include sports superstitions and theatre superstitions. And whenever I find myself approached by someone who I think is going to be resisting the idea of looking at these beliefs, I immediately start off by saying, well, let's have a look at theatre superstitions. And everyone goes, oh, wow, yeah, like you have to turn around and tap 2 heads 5 times. And if you say the word Macbeth on a stage, Macbeth, Macbeth, nothing happening. There you go. Wearing the same socks again and again and again if you're a hockey player. The people in the audience have certain rituals that they must do, otherwise the cricketer's not going to get the match. Fascinating. The most research that you'll find on particular superstitious beliefs, it's sports. Again and again and again. There are many famous sports peoples, generally in baseball, because baseball is an incredibly popular pastime in America. They just go wild, go backstage and ask every baseballer, okay, which bat do you use, which foot, which routine. I remember when I first handed in my proposal to my professor at UWA, he said, you're using too many abbreviations, I don't know what they mean. And I said, oh, you mean like PK, psychokinesis, the belief that you can move something like just using your mind. He said, no, I don't know what OCD means. I said, obsessive compulsive disorder. He said, why is that important? Because people get worried whether or not you're saying someone has a particular ritual again and again before they go up to the bat or to hit the ball. Is it ritual because of superstition or is it OCD? These are the sort of things that you have to start going into. Now, I personally define atheism as a lack of belief in a deity of any sort, defined or not. Now, there's a variety of reasons why someone might call themselves an atheist. Sometimes it might be personal experience. Sometimes people have gone through a massive experience in their lives and reasoned it out. It varies. There's so many how I came to be accounts. And it'd be lovely to see more books on this. Skepticism, however, rarely takes on fundamental religion claims directly, and certainly not within the bounds of their normal sceptical investigations. The essay by Daniel Loxton, Where Do We Go From Here?, discussed the importance of dealing with this core business of skepticism, because there are groups like atheists, humanists, secular humanists and so forth, who are doing a massively popular job on investigating a variety of things that fundamentalists do and that religions do. Big one at the moment, protests about World Youth Day. I know that there's been quite a lot of organisation in regards to protesting how human rights are being taken away due to World Youth Day. Yet an atheist can still believe that their horoscope is true. An atheist can quite easily believe that human beings never landed on the moon. You can have all sorts of conspiracy theory beliefs that are believed by a variety of people. I've had students who are Buddhists tell me that their tarot cards could tell them the future, and I've had atheists tell me that the moon makes people more crazy than usual. Of course it does. Full moon, people go crazy. They go nuts. Crime rates skyrocket. There's been study after study after study after study showing that this isn't true, but yeah, there's just something about the moon. Kids turn into werewolves. You look at them in the playground, they're just going bonkers. Yeah, there must be something in it. Likewise, skepticism isn't a belief system. What matters is the evidence. You can see how there are elements within skepticism that would certainly appeal to atheists, and yet I still see the two as distinct. Certainly a close-up Venn diagram at times, but in my mind distinct. As a teacher, there are certain elements that I've come up against which are just examples of sheer bad science. And it didn't matter if the science teachers I was working with were Muslim, Christian, atheist, never told me. There were things in which we would just go, oh, what the... I've got two that I'll discuss which might be of interest to you. Not just those who are atheists or sceptical or whatever, but in the interest of education of young people, there's some pretty shocking things that are going out there. As a final point, what's critical thinking? Taking a sceptical approach is not the only way that we can think. There's introspection, you can develop your reasoning based upon emotions. There's postmodernist ideas involved in social construction, creating a narrative of what is truth. You get this in literary criticism all the time. There's a variety of approaches in philosophy to thinking, and all of these should be taught in philosophy classes. Critical thinking is defined by Greg Haskins in A Practical Guide to Critical Thinking as a process by which we use our knowledge and intelligence to effectively arrive at the most reasonable and justifiable position on issues. This may not be the most reasoned way, but certainly it comes across to one as reasonable. You could defend it. And which endeavours to identify and overcome the numerous hindrances to rational thinking. Regarding the philosophical approach to scepticism, as I mentioned, that radical scepticism, such as shown by Pirro, has the notion that we know nothing at all. Regarding schools and education, within the philosophy and ethics course, which only started this year for Year 11 students, next year will be open for Year 12 students, and within education in general, yes, students should be allowed to ask sceptical questions, put constructive answers in reply. Feel free to go either way, play the devil's advocate, take a side that they don't necessarily believe in. It's all part of education as far as I'm concerned. The goal of critical thinking is not to create clever elitists who go around knocking things down. I've got a favourite short story, Love is a Fallacy. Imagines himself to be such an elitist that he can convince a young woman that he can fall in love with him just due to logical reasoning. It doesn't work. Eventually she shows him that in the end the heart's going to win out. It's a nice, cute story and all, but certainly one that we like to discuss with students. That very few philosophers are actually skeptics, and to study critical thinking, philosophy, logical reasoning, and to remove a huge bulk of the tradition would be doing a disservice. It would become a very boring course, I think, quite frankly. So although we distinguish skepticism as a process, we see evidence and make good arguments upon claims usually related to the paranormal and pseudoscientific, it's important to realise that there's other elements. Weird things, ladies and gentlemen. In front of you is a copy of today's horoscope. Well, it would be today's horoscope if it wasn't for the fact that Aries, Sagittarius, Cancer, Capricorn, they've all been removed. Can you spot yourself after experiencing what you went through today? There's one or two on there which are really quite nasty, which shocked me and put me, in fact, in mind of Douglas Adams, another famous atheist, who, in his stories about Dirk Gently, had the sad experience of Dirk Gently, who managed to very much annoy a local horoscope writer. And so, because the horoscope writer knew Dirk Gently's birthday, would always purposely make that particular horoscope sign the worst one ever. It's like, you're going to die in a horrible birthday. But people would write in the newspaper complaining, how come Cancer is saying that I'm going to to die in a horrible burning plane crash and hope I get eaten by piranhas, but he would just keep on doing it just to annoy Dirk gently. This, ladies and gentlemen, was essentially what my high schoolers came up with. They got a sheet of paper, cut out all the elements which identified who was what, gave it out to students in the playground and said, "Who are you?" And they found out how many people were able to accurately figure out who they were. I think they had a success rate of about, out of 100 students, 2%. This was how they studied the notion of the Barnum effect, or the Forer effect, which is you put out a nice blanket statement which could apply to anyone, and people will automatically start to say, "Oh yes, this could be me." There is another experiment which James Randi does in one of his famous videos that you can find online thanks to the wonder of YouTube and its marvellous disregard for copyright, where he hands out a Forer effect statement to a variety of people telling them this was specially made for you, and then he asks for hand up. How many people think that out of accuracy this is a 4 out of 5? Most people put the hands up. 5 out of 5, the rest of the class put their hands up.
Can I just say something?
Please.
Deer Brown does that very good.
Deer and Brown's another fabulous one. Again, thanks to the wonderful disregard of copyright on YouTube, you can find it yourself with a couple of search engines.
Well, according to Pan Juliet, I was going to say, according to Pan Juliet, Ptolemy's astrological chart is out so far because of the shift of the Earth that it's, I think he says 26 degrees, but pardon me, I don't think it's that much. But it means that all your astrological charts are so far out that they're totally irrelevant.
Yes.
Anyway.
And the sign of Ophiuchus is missing as well. The idea that Ptolemy's chart doesn't accurately match what is happening now in 2008, yes, that's true. The astrological bodies have moved over time, and so how much relevance has it got? And there's the missing sign Ophiuchus, which I would usually show to the students and point out to them that, in fact, their astrological sign had often shifted by 1 or 2 places.
And Northern Hemisphere.
And Northern Hemisphere as well, yeah. So there's a variety of things which
screws the whole southern half of the world, doesn't it?
Yes, and it's something that students can write a lot about, which is fabulous. They're able to research, write it out in a logical manner, do surveys, do the stats behind it, come back, do a wonderful presentation from the class. It's great. And yet there's issues with this. This was a simple activity that I could do with high school students, and yet you have to realise the sort of culture that we live in. People make money out of this. People make a lot of money out of it. People manage to get themselves in Women's Day for their entire career just based on the ability to come up with those Forer effect items. And in some cases, yes, they firmly believe in it. Entire families depend upon it. And as Daniel Loxton himself says about some of the more recent stats, it's emphatically the case that paranormal beliefs are widespread. The notion that traditional paranormal topics are dead, it flies in the face of the fact that, according to a Gallup poll in 2005, 3/4 of Americans believe at least one claim from a list of 10 classic paranormal items. For example, if you have no opinion regarding astrology or that the position of the stars and planets can affect people's lives, fully 25% of Americans say they believe in astrology. And if you're keeping count, that's 75 million people in the US alone. My own research, the most recent major paranormal research that's come out is from the UK, the Ipsos Mori in 2007, held in the UK. A third of people believe that governments around the world are concealing evidence of extraterrestrial beings. 9% believe that crop circles are the work of extraterrestrial forces. My Year 8s created a crop circle on the front lawn by simply using planks of wood and by getting, it was a class of about 22, they just stomped on it. They stomped and stomped and stomped until they created a big, beautiful smiley face in the lawn. Their very own crop circle. It was that easy. We took photographic evidence. And yet, people still continue to write books, I found one recently, saying crop circles are the work of aliens. I know that by the time they hit Year 9s, they probably started acting like aliens, but until then they were my little Year 8 students. Therefore, we have worries that students are learning untruths. My daughter created a crop circle. Don't you know that she is making fun of the aliens and their artwork? And her dad was abducted by an alien, he thinks. And therefore, what are you doing? Mocking his beliefs as well.
Yeah, I had a trip like that once.
Yeah, exactly. Students are going to be panicked about ghosts if you talk about ghosts. Students are going to call up the demons if you use an Ouija board. Doesn't matter that they made it themselves out of a couple of golf balls and a bit of cardboard. No, this is going to be a conduit to the other side. And for them, absolutely, perfectly reasonable. They can make a case to the school and the school will most likely back off. This has been recorded before in, let me see, I believe it was 1997 in the Skeptical Inquirer, a man named Larry Barrio, who wrote about how permissions were given by the school for him to do this with his primary school class and then just as rapidly taken away. So what do? Keeping that lesson in my mind from the very beginning, my own approach was pretty straightforward. I told everybody what I was doing. Absolutely everybody. I didn't shut up about it. I told the school counsellors, the deputy principal, the science teachers, the maths teachers, particularly regarding stats. They were really helpful. When, you don't often get an English teacher coming in saying, okay, so about the binomial that we got here, could we possibly... They just went freaky over that. Oh, we will value our subject. Cross-curricular. Why not? I told fellow department members. I told the boarding house. Very important if you've got a boarding house school because the kids live on school campus and so forth, away from mum and dad. It's all part of pastoral care. I told the media group of the school. The students won recognition for their investigations. We got in the newspaper about it. And yet there was still resistance. It took 2 years, but there was still resistance. There's also the importance of overarching curriculum. I have to emphasise, but by creating lesson plans, it was a lot of work to do this. To be able to come up with the ideas, help the students cut out the little pieces. It was more than that. It was digging out resources, the fact that YouTube was blocked in many schools, getting videos from overseas and making sure that they were compatible on the system at school, a lot of reading of books, rewriting of articles and paraphrasing them so it was suitable for a younger audience. It was massive. In consultation with other teachers, finding resources in both audio and visual. Some things just aren't suitable. Penn and Teller, gone. This is not to criticise Penn and Teller for what they do. What they do is fabulous. It just has a specific audience. And it's not kids. They have done stuff for kids before. There's a fabulous series that they did about art, and there were elements in that which I could have used. Penn and Teller are perfectly within their right to create what they think, suiting the audience that they have out there. But for kids, it's a bit tougher. I ended up turning to a wider framework in the end. No single website could support this well enough, as far as I thought. And because I was involved with philosophy for children who were contributing to the philosophy and ethics course which started, it was much easier to get scepticism and critical thinking in this particular aspect by using paranormal claims into a formal framework. The philosophy and ethics course, if you are unfamiliar with it, I've got copies of the syllabus over there. Feel free to look over them. Philosophy is meant to be a practical activity. We do philosophy when we seek to define something, when we challenge assumptions, when we construct an argument. It's going to be a skill that's useful in our personal world, our social world, world of work, and in the wider questions about how the world works. They learn skills that can be transferred to many different situations and contexts, and students who do philosophy and ethics can acquire these skills and become thinkers who recognise and reflect critically on issues in the light of their own and others' experiences. So pseudoscience in education. This is probably closer to the end of what I do in terms of what I've discovered through blogging. Pseudoscience in education has cropped up again and again, and those of you who work in an industry where you have PD days or where someone comes and says, right, we're going to figure out the personality of everybody here. We're going to do a lovely chart of 4 boxes, red, green, blue, yellow, and we're going to figure out where your personality fits into it and whether or not you're a team player and who's there, everyone, okay, wear your hat, and so, yeah, and eventually you're just sitting there saying, I really could have just spent the whole afternoon playing solitaire and got more intellectual engagement out of this. It happens in the education industry as well, where people will say, we're going to be doing this particular activity, it's going to be fabulous for kids, and you're saying, yeah, but where's the underpinning reason for this? What makes you think that the kids are going to get it? In fact, what sort of qualifications do you have in educational psych anyway? Where is this coming from? A variety of packages and programs come out. One particular one that I personally have issues with is DOOR. Is one of the big bugbears that I've come up across. DOOR simply came up across because there were a few bloggers investigating it. DOOR is a program started by a man called Winford Dorr who had a daughter who suffered from dyslexia. Incredibly sad story, very traumatised by the fact that she had dyslexia. He decided to come up with a cure. It involves balancing and juggling and standing on a board. He makes a lot of money out of this. DOOR recently collapsed in Australia. In fact, I had the opportunity to go to a meeting day for it. Collapsed in Australia first, and we in Australia, the bloggers of a network of about 5 of us, I was the one Australian in the group, and so on the day that they were going to have an open day at DOOR, I contacted the bloggers and said, I just went past the building, they're shut down. They said, can you phone them? I said, okay, phone them. Phoned them up, and I said, hi, what's happening? He said, oh, we've gone into financial disarray. And I said, what does this mean if this particular thing says, okay, these are the things that they have to go through if they're saying this particular thing. Fabulous. Blogged it immediately. That then went over to the UK, was blogged on their blogs, and next thing you know, Ben Goldacre's coming out with an article in The Guardian saying these particular bloggers broke the story. Door, however, is a classic example of pseudoscience. It is now arising again as an independent group without clinics, as they used to depend upon, where they charge people thousands of dollars just to come in for a certain amount of time. Now it's an independent program that can be sold out to people, which doesn't require people standing over making sure the kids go over the activities. Door won't stop. Many projects that go on, there's a lot of money to be made out of people who believe this strongly. Even at the points that some of the bloggers set up an alternative forum. So the parents who were engaged in Door, who were at a loss as to how the Door forums were shutting down because the company was gone. Even when a new forum was started up, didn't matter how much we would point out the scientific evidence, in the end their belief was stronger. You ever heard of Focus on the Family? This, No Apologies, The Truth About Life, Love and Sex. This is the sort of lovely little book that gets handed out to a certain teacher's Year 11 students, telling them that abstinence-only education is the only way. This ended up in the news after the parents found out. No Apologies is a classic example of books which are being put out there. There are religious education teachers who would look at that and just piss themselves laughing, of course. It is absurd. All the research points out that abstinence-only education is a massive failure and, in fact, is incredibly damaging to a community. And yet, books are still being published, such as this one, and are able to get into schools. This one, however, I don't know if you know about, Creelman. Seen this? If you have anyone who does TE still, a program that's still going out, it promotes creationism. It's a study guide. The last paragraph on teaching creationism in schools. The reason for the amazing string of successes we had with our Apollo flights to the moon was that we never tried to overlook anything. It's in the same matter of scientific honesty that I endorse the presentation of alternative theories for the origin of the universe, life, man, in the science classroom. It would be an error to overlook the possibility that the universe was planned rather than happening by chance. Adapted from Anne Lamott, 21 great scientists who believed in the Bible. Creelman has about maybe 10 of these out, and he's been going since 2002. I remember the first one that I picked up in 2002 when I first started teaching English, and then I started realising that Creelman has a very interesting take on what education really should mean. It's very subtle, just little banners down the side, last pages at the end, who the publisher's supporters are, a variety of Christian youth group camps. You know, I listen to Sunshine FM on now and then. They have nice music, but I'm not entirely certain if they really should be behind this sort of thing, quite frankly. The thing that amuses me the most is that the human biology textbook has to teach them evolution, and yet there they are still with their little message up the front.
Is this stuff state approved?
I bought this today. This has been out since 2002. I was wondering when anyone's going to notice it. I've been sort of noticing it being on a variety of book lists from a variety of schools. This is Creelman. His offices, let me see. Yeah, they're out there. This is well known. That's just two examples of pseudoscience, the overlap between atheism and skepticism, and quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, it's an example of how education does deserve a good keen eye, because you never know what's going to be out there. And probably my best suggestion for anyone who may not be a teacher and yet is still interested in the education and future is get involved with your schools. Turn up to parent-teacher open days. Is it possible for religious schools to have open-minded, broad discussions on philosophy and ethics, which does require looking at a variety of subjects which may not agree with the school? Yes. It is possible for a school to have this. It is possible for teachers to be open-minded enough, even if they happen to have a particular religious background. Maybe there aren't as many as there should be, but it'd be wonderful we could encourage them.
AstronomyCast takes a facts-based journey through the cosmos as it offers listeners weekly discussions on astronomical topics ranging from planets to cosmology. Hosted by Fraser Kane of Universe Today and myself, Dr. Pamela Gay of Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, this show brings the questions of an avid astronomy lover directly to an astronomer. Together, Fraser and I explore what is known and being discovered about the universe around us. Join us each week as we take a facts-based journey through the cosmos at astronomycast.com.
Thanks for joining me for the Skeptic Zone. Our full episode is back next week with Stefan, of course. Dr. Raichi reports a grain of salt in the think tank. And before then, why not go to our site at www.skepticzone.tv, scroll down and click on the t-shirt icon. You can buy Skeptic Zone t-shirts, cups and all sorts of other things. Just the thing to wear to TAM. Until next week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to The Skeptic Zone. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for comments, contacts, and extra video reports.
The Skeptic Zone.